we've done lots of things in these 2 years. We've done 6 expert workshops, 2 pan-European online surveys, lots of interviews, and we're even holding our final conference in Brussels on the 26th of November. But today I would like to share with you just a few highlights of what we have found in those 2 years. And let's start with the overall picture we live in. Maybe you've heard the term of VUCA world. It stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This term becomes again increasingly popular, although it exists since late 80s already. And that's pretty much the picture of the world we live in. So everything is chaotic, unpredictable, uncertain, changes rapidly and quickly. And if you let it go, yes, it's so difficult to survive and let alone to prosper in this world. So what we need to succeed in the world of VUCA when it comes to education and training, we need still to try to develop a vision, understanding to the extent possible, to show commitment to our vision and remain agile. Agility is one of the key words of the new age, so we need to be adapting efficiently to constantly changing circumstances and just be ready for change, because change is an essential component of this new life. When we talk about curriculum guidelines, I also need to specify what we mean by curriculum, as we propose actually to move from this narrow perspective of looking at it as a narrow list of subjects towards a more broad perspective, which characterizes it as an overall learning experience of individuals, but also groups, because we're also talking about group learning, collective learning, collaborative learning. And it's not just in schools, but actually throughout the whole professional life of workers for manufacturing. We received quite a lot of inputs, and you remember different sources that I was mentioning. The challenge was how to structure it all, because it's so complex, and we needed a framework that would allow to capture this complexity, but at the same time keep it manageable. We looked at multiple existing frameworks and we decided we probably need to customize it and develop our own, which would be just fitting for the purpose. And we asked our stakeholders through workshops, through surveys, to identify the key elements that would need to be included when we talk about developing and implementing curriculum. And these 8 elements were suggested by the stakeholders, so we clustered them in those 8 dimensions. And the next step was to find out where do we set priorities, because it's still too big, we can't go into each of them. All these elements are extremely complex on their own, so we had to identify priorities. We had a pan-European consultation, and what we found out that stakeholders nominated the first 4, surprisingly the first 4 were nominated as the key elements of the framework that require most substantial attention in the coming years when it comes to reshaping curricula. And they refer to strategy, collaboration patterns, content, and learning environment. It doesn't mean that we just forgot about the rest of the framework, and the other elements we are also addressing, but to a lesser extent we are focusing primarily on the first 4. In the remaining part of my presentation, I would like to present to you the key highlights of those 4 elements. I don't want to overload you with information because the guidelines will be quite extensive, so the only thing I can do in the coming time is just to show you some teasers, some appetizers of what I'm talking about. And let's start with the first one, with strategy. So what have we found is crucial to keep in mind when developing education and training curricula for manufacturing professionals in the new age when it comes to strategy of the educational offer. Well, lifelong learning, that's the first point. That probably should not be forgotten. It means that when we talk about specific programs, specific educational offer, we should not look at it in isolation. at this point of time, but we have to keep in mind that it's part of the overall lifelong learning experience, and that it's part of our task as education and training providers also to prepare students and give them this mindset that they will have to upskill, reskill themselves in the future. So lifelong learning should be embedded as part of skill, actually, which is embedded in every single step of the learning trajectory. The second one, big picture education. So as I already mentioned, it's also closely related to lifelong learning. Each educational step should not be seen in isolation. It relates and has to relate to the bigger picture of the world, to the overall learning trajectory, and also to the trends on the labor market. And we need to make sure that when students are following their educational program, that they get an opportunity to see the bigger picture. Students should also be given a prominent role in also designing curricula and implementing it. Students should be seen as change agents and be engaged in their own learning activities. So we are moving from passive learners, passive receivers of information towards active, proactive agents that are actually taking their own education and training in control. When we talk about the orientation of an educational offer, we often talk about market needs, employability. What do people need to serve the market, to fit the industry, so that they fit into the industrial perspective? But we should not forget the importance of societal needs, aspects like sustainability, ethics, and of course learners' needs themselves and their own individual characteristics, and respect the diversity of context and capacities. Another point is shifting towards competences from knowledge, so that we're not talking about just putting some knowledge into the heads of our students, but it's more competences, values, skills, mindsets that they have to develop in their heads. These mindsets will have to evolve in time, because knowledge will become obsolete in no time. And finally, we need to focus on personalized and personal learning. There are differences between these two terms. We will explain them, of course, also in the guidelines, but let's move on to the next one. Collaboration. I will probably not go into all the points, just for the sake of time, but let's just pick a few of them. What are the emerging collaboration patterns? Well, the role of industry partners is changing, and industry partners should not be seen as just employers of students, but they become full learning partners engaged in full students' learning experience, including the first point when the strategy of curricula is developed, and then throughout the point when they already hire students. But when they hire students in this perspective, it's already like, it's like dating somebody. You have already a long relationship before that, and you know each other, you know what, is it a good match or not, so that employers are not seen as kind of a last minute party that comes to the university when graduates are already ready for the industry and tries to hire them, but that they know and they cultivate their future workforce from the very beginning. Creating learning ecosystems. Well, it's obvious that education and training in the new age is a highly complex process which cannot be left just to learning or to education and training providers on their own. There are all kinds of parties that are relevant here, including supporting structures, industry associations, cluster organizations, policymakers, and even broader community that all need to get engaged for all kinds of purposes, and it has to be an ecosystem. And there are already good initiatives in Europe, including initiatives of European Commission, which are targeting this aspect. We also talk about peer-to-peer learning. And one more point, we need to shift from human-machine interaction towards human-machine collaboration. So there is also the switch in the mindset that you don't see machine anymore as a kind of equipment, but it's your collaboration partner. And so special aspects need to be paid, special attention needs to be paid to how to see this, how to develop this mindset that this is a partner. What kind of new skills are needed? What kind of collaboration skills with machines should we be training our students? This is a whole new world of training. Right, so learning environments. It's basically how do you organize your education. So what kind of tools do you use? What kind of setting do you create so that you train what needs to be trained? Lots of elements that we're capturing there as well. These are again just highlights. Well, problem-based learning, I think you're all familiar with that. Culture that accepts potential failures. Then experimentation platforms, collaborative learning, stimulating creativity. Yeah, that's an interesting point over there, that in a standard form, in a traditional way of educating engineers, we used to try to develop objectivity, standard thinking, you know, this attempt to, so that students know correct answers. That's all old times. Now we need to focus more on creativity, own opinion, divergent interpretation, and subjective thinking, which is absolutely lacking in most of the current educational programs. And of course, real working conditions need to be reflected in the learning environment, and technology-enabled learning can also be of great help. Because obviously, if you want your students or your workforce to be familiar with the latest technology, you should expose them to that already during their educational process. And finally, the content. Again, here, lots of things that we've covered in our guidelines related to the technical side of the curriculum, which, of course, nobody doubts that technical skills remain crucial for engineers of the future. But what we try to say is that technical is not enough anymore. And there is a need to look at non-technical skills like creativity, like design thinking, like innovation, social skills, team work skills, and so on. But also ethics, social inclusion, diversity, sustainability, that relates to the mindsets that I was referring early on. But also, yes, what I mentioned in the beginning, knowledge on its own will become obsolete very quickly. So we need to make sure that students are able to constantly update their knowledge, to acquire new knowledge from this increasing ocean of information that is just exponentially, or that is rapidly accelerating. And what we need to make sure is that students are familiar with the whole idea of themselves looking for that information constantly later on in their trajectories. And we've even heard opinions that universities of the future will almost completely rely on sources like Google and YouTube, for example, and similar for knowledge and information, so that students will be just digging for it themselves. Who knows, we'll see. And the final point is relating to safety and ergonomics at work and mindfulness, because that's very often overlooked in the approach, and we kind of expect employers to take care of their employees, to make sure that the working conditions are safe. What we need in our students, and we need to educate this mindset that they are mindful about their physical and mental health at work, because you know the statistics, you know how many accidents, but also related to psychological burnouts are happening nowadays, and with digitalization it's even increasing even more rapidly. So we need to educate people how to deal with that, how to be mindful, aware of that, and also the technical, the risk related to technology, that also should not be forgotten. The health risks related to all kinds of whatever, radiation emission and electromagnetic fields from all those sensors on the workplace. We need to bring this on top of the agenda and start talking about it, and we need our students to be aware of that. This is just a very rapid overview of what we were covering in the guidelines. And I think that was my final content slide. It's just an invitation to all of you to come to our conference in Brussels on the 26th of November, because there we will be discussing this in detail and we will be formally releasing the guidelines. So we look forward to seeing you all. Thank you very much.